Hi, dear listeners. This is Kate Riga. I'm here to make a quick pitch that you consider becoming a TPM Prime member. TPM has used the member model for over a decade now, and our loyal members are the only reason we've been able to weather the turbulence of the media landscape and avoid the fate that has befallen so many other independent outlets. For $70, you get no paywall, fewer ads, access to the Hive member forum, a members only newsletter, and more. For $140 a year, you get all of that, plus no ads at all. Without our members, there is no podcast, not to mention that I'm out of a job. Thank you so much for listening and supporting us. We couldn't do it without you.
Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall Podcast featuring Kate Riga. It is Wednesday, September the 17th. We are recording just after 12 noon. I say that because last week, big news broke, I don't know, hour or so after we recorded the podcast, and that was the news of the murder of Charlie Kirk. When we first heard it, we obviously didn't know he had died, but it was a funny thing because everybody's so on edge. Let me rephrase that. His murder obviously was not a funny thing. The circumstances were a funny thing because normally you don't like to. It's kind of odd to have something released in the face of big news and you didn't discuss it. So I have thought, like, should we re-record? Should we do like a podcast extra or something like that? Obviously, we ended up not doing that. But I wanted to mention a couple things about how I found out about this because I think it captures some of the essence of the thing itself. I was in the midst of running an errand, and someone, actually a lapsed Republican, sent me a link and said something to the effect of, "This is very bad." And I saw that "this is very bad" before I saw what the news was. And there's a lot of things that are very bad these days, but it seemed kind of ominous. Like there was an intensity in his message, and I think that captures the response of almost everybody. Obviously, the fact that he was killed is a very bad thing. But in addition to that, I think everybody saw that this is going to be very bad for like everything else. This is going to be a bad turn in our politics, and a lot of bad things are going to come out of this. It was just obvious at the very beginning. And I think I speak for most people. There were different videos. I'm sure there probably are hundreds of them, in fact, since you've got a crowd of, I don't know if it was hundreds or a few thousand people or something like that. And just in the nature of things, everybody's like, in any given time, half the people are making a video on their iPhone. So I'm sure there are innumerable videos. I believe I heard of some that I didn't actually see. But the one I saw was from a distance, and you could see where he was hit. And so from the beginning, and I suspect like a lot of people, I had pretty little hope that he was going to survive that injury. It seemed like a catastrophic injury. Obviously, he did die. I think it seems possible that he was mortally wounded from the beginning. The other thing, though, is that within, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes of that first person telling me this, both of my sons, one of whom is 18, one of whom is 17, texted me telling me about this, had I seen something like that. Now, both of my sons, notwithstanding, me, are, not terribly political. Politics is, I'd be surprised if either of my sons can name more than a couple senators. I mean, maybe they'd surprise me. I'm just trying to give you a sense. They're not political, really, at all. Not in the sense that I am, not in the sense that probably you are as a listener to this podcast, but they heard about this instantly. And that is because Charlie Kirk was someone who in addition to being, we're kind of finding out now, sort of like an adopted son of Donald Trump and all of the things in the MAGA sphere, was also part of that, young men's podcast osphere, which permeates not only beyond young MAGA men or even young conservative men, it bleeds out into kind of all young men, and and I think in a secondary way to sort of all teens. In the same way that we think about Joe Rogan, we listeners to this podcast think about Joe Rogan as again part of the magosphere. That's not totally true. He is that, but he's also just listened to by a lot of people who either the politics doesn't really hit them, or they just kind of tune that part of it out or something like that. And so that's a big part of this, that just that way that lots and lots of people who are not tuned into politics at all heard about this instantly. And he was someone who they kind of, not that they knew, but just in the sense that you hear about someone dying who like it's just a name, you're like, oh, that's so sad he died. But a real person, even if it wasn't someone you liked, just a real person, it's sort of shocking, especially if you see those videotapes. I sort of doubt those are the main things that we're going to be the main issues that we will be talking about when Kate and I start discussing this in a moment. But I wanted to mention those because I think that those are parts of the dimensions of this story that, for understandable reasons, isn't part of the conversation within the world of politics, the left and right world of politics. So, Kate, you have the floor.
Yeah, I want to get into a lot about this because, as you said, we're in kind of a unique position where this happened as kind of far back in history as our podcasting schedule allows. So we have the kind of quote unquote benefit of also having all of the fallout to talk about, which is so much. And there are so many different kind of spokes of this wheel that I want to get to, but I kind of want to start with the liberal angst of it all, because this is a part of the conversation that I think has proven most difficult for people, like all of you, our listeners, news junkies, people in my own life. Like, this has been the thing that they've really struggled with, right? Because, okay, you have the piece, the human piece, the kind of least interesting piece to me personally, which is, it's not good to be a human who cheers on the death of another human. Okay, fine. That's like, I think that's not really in my realm. Like, that's kind of to each their moral own on that. But then you have the piece of, okay, it's bad for democracy, right? To have people gunned down for their politics. Pretty easy to agree on this one. Okay. Then you have, well, there's this browbeating of liberals, right? That does not stop at the water's edge of kind of condemning this as bad, but which has moved into a place of total hagiography, that it's not enough to kind of, that's even saying something as anodyne as, I didn't agree with a lot of his views, or I think he was really toxic to our society, but he shouldn't have been killed, is now to this like great kind of doxing swarm on the right, which is being eagerly led on by, the president on down. That is now grounds to be fired or doxed or ostracized. That goes hand in hand with these, like, I think pretty unprecedented public displays of respect for Charlie Kirk, who was neither a lawmaker nor, a president, nor kind of one of these figures of like unusual unified esteem, right? I mean, fundamentally, he was a big force on the right, but he was a pundit, he was a commentator, a very well connected one. And there have been tributes at NFL games. You have some like brands putting out statements. And then, in addition to all of this, you have Trump and Vance and Bondi and the upper echelons of the administration promising retribution, promising vengeance, promising war, promising violence, for this like kind of generalized they of the amorphous force on the left that killed Charlie Kirk, right? And this is the kind of toxic stew in which people on the left I have found are really struggling. Um, and think with kind of good reason because it took about 30 minutes to move from the realm of kind of like in a free society, you don't want people to be murdered to you will get on the ground and you will kneel about this and you will rend your garments and you will cry or else you have endangered yourself and your livelihood and your political movement. And so all of this just puts me in a position where I have a little bit of pushback to the kind of those reactions which, were wall to wall, including within our own newsroom of the kind of, this will be very bad kind of thing because I just think it puts a little bit of onus on the left to like police the actions of absolutely everyone and takes all the agency from the right. This idea that, well, now they're going to react in these violent and horrifying ways as if the reaction is inevitable, right? And the incentivizing event must be stopped. And that is also coupled with the fact that everything we only had vague threats from the administration, but everything that they're kind of gesturing towards, which is primarily this attack on like NGOs, that has been in the works for years since literally Trump's first term. So, and I'm not saying they wouldn't use this as like a predicating event for that, but I don't know. I guess my first thoughts when that occurred were kind of like, well, what are they going to do? Occupy blue cities? Check. Try to make life horrifying for trans people? Check. Go after every kind of bastion of liberal institution that might pose a threat to them? Check. I don't know how much you needed a kind of explosion to set off that powder keg. So that was my huge stew of different thoughts on this that I present to you.
Yeah, no. So a few things on this. I mean, I think that this is going to be bad. That was a sort of that's a first impulse, right? You go from all right, I'm going about my day, and I found out this happened, and we know who we're dealing with here. We know who we're dealing with here. We are dealing with a frequently violent authoritarian movement that is built around getting its people wound up into a spiral of fury. And this is about to happen. Because you know them, the whole thing. I totally agree with your. I mean, first of all, just the even let's set aside that Kirk was a bigot and a sort of at best a rabble rouser and a provoker. Okay. Let's just say in the more anodyne sense, a highly controversial partisan. Okay. That who could possibly disagree with that? That is an as anodyne and factual a description as you can get. You don't have public outpourings like that for think about when now obviously circumstances are different. Think about when Rush Limbaugh died. Kind of different in a million ways, but in some ways very similar, generationally, technologically different, but very similar. Um, you know, obviously he, I think Trump gave him the same medal that he's now going to posthumously give Kirk, and before he died and everything. I don't think anybody thought like, wow, we're gonna close everything down for a moment of silence. No one, no one imagined that that there would be a society-wide, this is a loss and we are going to come together to mourn our loss. Now, obviously, Rush Limbaugh was not murdered. That makes a difference, right? When you know someone and you are not negatively inclined towards them, the fact that they die such a violent death, such a young death with a young family, you're going to react. You're going to set aside a lot of the warts. Again, that all makes sort of sense. But again, as you said, not a politician, not an elected official, not someone who, there are certain people who don't have that, but are sort of, I don't know, even Oprah is polarized, but the way that Oprah was 20 years ago, everybody loves Oprah, kind of, that's that sort of thing. But we can also see, when you mentioned the thing about the football teams having little, I don't know what they were. I didn't see one of the games that had that, or I didn't see that part of it. But I did hear that I guess there were, half a dozen teams or half a dozen games where they did not do that. And those teams / stadiums got on the shit list. And then they got, they're going to be boycotted and all this. And I have no doubt that it is that way with the brand. So in some ways, what we are seeing here is the 8 or 9 months of prepping that you've had by all of the retaliation against companies, against teams that we've seen, right? Because companies know now, if you get on the wrong side of this president, at a minimum, it'll be a headache. So you see all of that stuff. Then you have just this this perverse agreement not to disagree with the proposition that political violence in this country is either equal or that it's mostly on the left. I mean, this is so demonstrably absurd. Even if you include things that I think a lot of people don't and really shouldn't include. Someone broke a piece of glass in June 2020, right? The stuff tied to the sort of on the margin stuff with George Floyd. Someone I noticed something that I didn't know, but I kind of take it I assume it, frankly. Mass shooting down in Florida at one of the colleges a few months ago. It was by a hardcore MAGA guy. Got pictures of him in a MAGA hat. Not to mention the fact that you've got, the murder of the, one of the party leaders of the Democratic Party in Minnesota. Just what was that, 2 or 3 months ago? Just a few months ago, and in which Trump's basic response was like, "Fuck you. Who cares?"
Yeah, don't exactly remember game time tributes to her and her husband being gunned down in their home, and complete indifference from the Republican establishment.
And one of the I'm not even sure he stood out that much because it's so universal. But Mike Lee, senator from Utah, where this happened, was on Twitter. The left did this to us. Remember what they did to us. All the kind of the most, kind of Hutu and Tutsis sort of, getting everybody riled up. He literally, after that happened in Minnesota, he was tweeting, making fun of it. And if people don't remember, I'm not speaking loosely. He was making jokes about it on Twitter. That is so shocking. That is so profoundly shocking. A United States senator, if this had been a random person on the street getting gunned down, if it had been a criminal getting, that you would joke about anybody dying, let alone a top political leader. This wasn't just an elected official in that state. This was the former Speaker of the State House. This was a top party leader in that state. murdered, and obviously the same guy tried to kill another lawmaker. If I believe he and his spouse survived. The former Speaker of the House and her spouse did not survive. But four people gunned down, two of whom died. Um, look, we are totally on the same page on this, and you add in the sort of the Ezra Klein type saying this like he did it right. This is someone who was doing it right. Now there are some in the MAGA era, it gets hard to find. There are some people who I might say, okay, I really disagree with that person, but that person, like, I could have a conversation with that person. This was not this guy. This was a hyper aggressive. I mean, even this is. It shows the mix of nonsense and lack of cultural literacy. One of the big things we've seen is he went out to debate people. We need debates. But this is, I don't know if you have to be kind of on the young side, not that I'm one to speak, to know about this. The debate me, that's a meme. That is a whole cultural construct in modern political. It is a thing that generally means a abusive or quasi-abusive know-it-all guy who is basically saying, yeah, debate me. Show me I'm wrong. Those aren't debates. Those are like, come here and I will yell at you. And but let me just finish on one quick point. Liberals and like, what are we? Liberals, center left, kind of everybody who is not MAGA and who does not want to rule this country by force has to be able to say, we all need there to be no political violence. And I'm sorry for his family. I'm sorry he had to die that way. It's terrible. But he was a toxic partisan. And, a lot of Democrats want more of their own toxic partisans. Like, if that's what works for you, great. But this is, the left, the Democrats, whatever, they didn't do this. This is just, a guy who may have been kind of, young Mormon guy from rural Utah who's bisexual, and he got really angry at Charlie Kirk. And I wish he wouldn't have done that. But like, that has nothing to do with Chuck Schumer, nothing to do with me.
Yeah, there's two separate pieces here. One is the kind of, a violent, politically inflected thing happens. The left says, both sides do this, we have to turn the temperature down. The middle says, both sides do this, we have to turn the temperature down. The right says, we have to jihad the left because that's where all the source of the violence is coming from. Whether or not the shooter has any even vague ideological ties whatsoever, right? When this happens, institutional Democrats condemn it. No matter if the shooter is quote unquote one of them or, just a kind of blatantly MAGA right-wing reactionary. The right ranges from silence and indifference, like on the Minnesota shootings for the most part, to outright mockery. When Paul Pelosi was almost beaten to death with a hammer, the wall-to-wall reaction from Republicans as varied as Don Jr. to Glenn Youngkin was to make fun of it. Okay? Like, that is where we are. And that shows that there is a specific poison, rot, being washed in violence that is happening on the right that is not happening on the left. And that's the reaction level. Then the who does the violence level, I actually personally think the kind of rush to the motives thing is what we're doing now because everyone's completely given up the gun conversation because you have the Supreme Court as a backstop, which ensures that even if you did the Sisyphean task of getting gun regulations through Republicans in Congress, it's almost assured that the Supreme Court would knock it down at this point. I mean, look at the bump stock ban, right? the shooting that was so bad that even the Trump administration was roused to action and banned bump stocks, and the Supreme Court completely knocked that down. So I think this motive hunt now is what we do because nobody's bothering to like have any kind of gun conversation anymore. And I realize that this most recent shooting was the kind of hunting rifle that would probably not be banned in any kind of version of a regulated society. But, the general point still stands. But when we're looking at motivations, we just have plentiful data, including a Department of Justice study that the Trump administration has since scrubbed from the internet, showing that right wing violence is much more frequent and it's much more fatal than left wing violence. And it is just, I think what's like making this period difficult for like well meaning liberals is there's not even honesty about that level of things, right? Like the left and the middle are trying to be responsible and temperate, and then the right is just bowling everyone over with this sense of like, well, now we're going to hurt you because this was your fault.
Yeah, I would like to see um I would like to see a lot more of Democratic elected officials when kind of like, he says it's the left, is it this, is it that, to basically say, I'm not even going to debate this. Everybody knows this. So it is, I'm not even, you want to kind of, you want to add in there, here's 10 studies, here's government studies. Like, but as a broad, so kind of because you are talking to many people who maybe don't know this, you want to kind of point to the receipts, as it were, but not even to engage it, because you do end up, if you're sort of litigating point after point, you do kind of inevitably just, there's a rhetorical trajectory that gets you back to everybody's done some. It's on both sides, kind of a both sides kind of thing. When it's not, it's just not. There's really one example that is like what the right claims, and that is the shooting of Steve Scalise, and also the killing. I can't remember the exact details, but one or two Capitol police officers, I believe, were killed. Others were injured. So it was a big deal. And I don't remember the exact details, but that guy was kind of a Democrat. Kind of had volunteered for campaigns, and a nobody guy. No one ever heard of him. But that legitimately was kind of like a Democrat, in the sense of someone who donated to Democratic candidates, kind of watched a lot of MSNBC or something like that. That was almost 10 years ago. And that was horrific. Even the people, the general public conversation sort of seeded this when the guy who almost killed Trump, it's sort of accepted that was them, they, when in fact he was, it goes back to your point about guns, Kate. It doesn't seem like that guy really had much of any politics that was like visible. Um, but what he had, he was a hardcore gun kid, super into guns. And what you have there, and I think there was a lot of reporting that actually backed this up with a lot of background on him. That's the kid who ends up shooting up the school. Kind of an angry 17 to 22 or 23-year-old man who's really into guns, and angry in a clinical sense, to probably depressive at some level, and just wants to go out killing a lot of people. And he decided to do it trying to kill Donald Trump. I think to really put this conversation on the right footing, we have to go a little further than say that political violence is overwhelmingly on the right. It's that Donald Trump himself is responsible for almost all the uptick in political violence, including the stuff that is directed at the right. He is the one who has introduced lock her up. The repeated calls for violent retribution against adversaries. He is the one who has heated up our politics. And you see that, not that people on in any way on the meaningful left, I'm not talking about, some answer slash, radical Antifa types. I'm saying kind of, the actual political discourse in the society. It's Donald Trump who has people on the left demanding more extreme political action. Changing the Constitution, shutting governments down, all this kind of and that is a critical part of this. He is the one who has made American politics violent, both rhetorically and literally. It predated him, it created him in some ways, but he's the gasoline that has gotten us here. So let's not be too over restrained by not saying the full reality of the situation.
I mean, this, in the kind of society that Trump and Charlie Kirk openly advocated for, violence like this is an inevitability, right? I mean, there was that one clip of Charlie Kirk going around where he said, some people are just going to have to die. That's kind of the price we pay for having an expansive version of the Second Amendment. In a zero-sum, authoritarian, my political opponents are my enemies, my entire political ideology rests on causing those enemies pain and hardship. Violence breaks out and it splashes back on the people who have created that society as well. So that's a piece of it here too, that is, I think, what is so scary to me is like seeing all of these kind of institutions, honor Charlie Kirk as if he was this like great unifying kind of exemplar of a life. Because you can absolutely condemn his killing and also acknowledge with complete frankness that he contributed to the society we're in now, where these acts of horrifying violence are coming at like a faster clip than we've ever seen before. And that's given the fact that mass school shootings have not made the news in years, really. Like, well, the first back to school one that'll get written up, maybe one that claims an unusual number of lives, maybe if it's little kids, but that's no guarantee. And all the rest of them are just not newsworthy anymore.
Yeah, there was one literally the day of Kirk's murder. I can't remember. I believe one child died and maybe another was wounded. I lost track of the details. I believe there was another one either just after or just before. But you're right. As long as I hate to even say this, I don't know where the number is, but like as long as you're talking about a couple kids dying, that's sort of treated as like an auto fatality. I mean, cars crash. Not every car crash gets written up, right? They happen. That's just, and now school shootings are kind of like school shootings happen, as long as it's not like 20 fatalities or something like you had in that one down in Florida. God, it must be upwards of 10 years ago. Is it Parkland? Is that the yeah. That they don't, they don't make the cut. They don't, it's just background noise. And but all of these things, as you said, there's kind of even the most hardcore gun restrictionist in this country who has any connection to mainstream politics is not talking about banning hunting rifles. So in a narrow sense, there's no gun control universe where this would have been impossible to do. If anything, this is the, whenever you have those, it's almost a trope now. You have, like, with Gabby Giffords and her husband, I'm a gun owner. I grew up shooting guns, but I think there should be blah 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 blah. They're talking about their hunting rifles, at least paradigmatically. Um, but we also have to see that gun violence, not guns focused on as an adjunct to criminality, gang shootings, holdups, blah 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 blah, but mass shootings uh, where the killing is for social effect. These are all social contagions in the same way that political violence is a social contagion. It is, I've written a couple pieces about this on the site, but it's still, I mean, as I think the closest we can get now to an understanding of why this kid, he's not a 21 or 22, something like that. Seems like a kid to some of us, but an adult, um, did this, is that it it seems hard. It seems to be the closest we can get is he was in a relationship with a man who was thinking about transitioning, or maybe is transitioning to a trans woman. Is, according to reports, that the shooter is bisexual. Uh, that this was his, because he talks about, the one thing we see from him, he's a hater. Charlie Kirk is a hater, and he can't be reasoned with, and that's why he did it. So that seems to be in that constellation, because there doesn't seem to be anything else about this guy that's left wing, and is I I wouldn't say bisexuality is left wing, except in a way that it's kind of coded in our politics. But let's step back from that. Let's assume some version of that is right. It still kind of begs the question, like, okay, then he got a hunting rifle, scoped out a space, and almost blew the guy's head off. How do you get there? Well, you get there because you see other examples of it. You see other political violence. It's the same way we even see this with, it's not discussed a lot, but it is a fact that suicide is often a social contagion. Happens in one place, other people do it, they get the idea. So the idea of political violence is out there, in our society.
Yeah, I covered all the Tyler Robinson stuff yesterday, the charging document and his first court appearance. And I think what really struck me by it is it felt a little bit similar to Luigi Mangione in terms of there was this assumption that there's this great political, ideological passion behind the act of violence. And,
Hmm.
with Luigi, it was the healthcare system is totally broken. Everybody we know has been hurt by it. And that's what made him snap. And maybe that's true on kind of some level, but I remember, when they unveiled the quote unquote manifesto, being like, I guess, it's like a few lines in there where he wrote, I'm not really the most well versed on this topic. Like it wasn't
Yeah, you study up before you become before you do
right.
your high profile assassination. Yeah.
And people still kind of talk about it that way as if he was this like healthcare reform crusader turned violent, but there's never been really much evidence of that. There's been attempts to kind of find string that I guess he had some chronic pain and maybe, but those things have never been kind of confirmed or solidly linked together. He doesn't leave behind, troves of writing on the subject and like intellectual fire. It almost it's reminds me of this one because the greatest linkage you can find is this growing tolerance, understanding of trans people. We know that Charlie Kirk was an unapologetic, violent bigot against trans people. And, there are some text messages to that effect. But again, there is no online footprint, showing kind of a great interest in the topic
Yep.
from everyone kind of in the constellation of his life says that he was getting more kind of pro trans for like obvious reasons, but that he wasn't very political. Ken Klippenstein, or how do you say his name,
I believe that's it. Yeah.
got some of the Discord chats, and like they look exactly like every man in
Ev-
my life who has a Discord chat looks like.
Yep. Yep.
So again, it's just, and in the text messages he
And
says,
that was Ken's point, that
right,
this
right,
is just a gamer chat. There's like nothing here for our listeners who haven't seen this, that the reveal here was that there it's a gamer chat. The people in there are either apolitical or kind of all politics, people from different things. They're talking about games.
right. And I was really, really struck by the section of the charging document that has the text between Tyler Robinson and, his roommate who he was allegedly in the relationship with, where you're just struck by how kind of childish the whole thing is. Like, there's this long section where he's fretting about getting the gun back, and not just in the sense of like I'm going to get caught, but like, oh, my dad's going to be really pissed at me if I lose my grandpa's gun, which is like, that's the biggest of your worries. He's texting the roommate like, "Oh, I'll be home soon. I just have to like deal with this gun thing." Like, it's just totally. And then you have the piece where the family, the parents convince him to turn himself in, even though he was kind of vaguely planning to kill himself. I mean, the whole thing has this air of like unreality. I
Yeah.
mean, I did
Yeah.
not walk away from it with this sense of this is someone on a quest who was planning this for a really long time, who had kind of thought through what doing something like this would mean and decided that that was kind of worth the action. That's
Yeah.
you get the sense of like, did he even know this was real life? It's like,
Hmm.
it's almost that
Hmm.
kind of non-formed frontal cortex thing of like how teenagers don't really have any impulse control because they're not very good at thinking things through. And none of
Hmm.
this is to say like to excuse him. What I think is the way more interesting piece of this is it's we're seeing this rash of chronic and profound alienation, of unreality, of like surrealism, where people are committing these acts of violence impulsively, you know, almost ironically. Sometimes, as you mentioned with the attempted assassination of Trump, you just get the sense that this is the new school shooting, right? That doesn't really rate attention anymore. So if you want to kind of go out in a blaze of glory, this is the way you have to do it. Which all of that, I don't think what I'm struck by anyway is the ideology of it. And again, not to dismiss that I think right wing, domestic terrorism is like a huge threat, but we have this other thing happening, which is different, which is non ideological, and which is still, I think, a side effect of the politics and society in which we live, where there isn't any sense of community or kind of like incremental working towards this big goal. It's this weird sense of like, I don't know, despair, emptiness, kind of.
Yeah. One point you hit on that I think you are 1,000% right is that when we study all of this stuff, what we usually do or should realize pretty quickly is that people who kill people in political contexts, political assassinations, and so forth, the biggest reality is there are people who wanted to kill someone in most cases, and the rationale tends to be the clearest path, the clearest sort of mental flowchart to get you there. And I'm sure you've seen, Kate, and I even have friends who are part of this. There genuinely is romanticization and support of a sort for Luigi Mangione. I mean, there's a small scale cult to the guy on the left as a, you know, I don't know what you want to call it, kind of a an outlaw folk figure,
A
taking on.
revolutionary.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. As you said, he couldn't quite be bothered to read up on healthcare markets. His interests seem pretty marginal. And in this case, as you said, I still think it's clear that the government, that the FBI is sitting on a lot of information, but it's also possible that there's not really much more in there of a revelatory nature. Um, than we've already seen. And most of what they're hanging this on is his mom, who seems to something going on there with the mom. She's the fact witness for a lot of these cases. Not directly, indirectly. We have paraphrases what the mom said. He was getting super left wing, all this kind of stuff. Like, okay, look, I'm sure if you are a Mormon woman living in rural Utah and your son it's not really clear they knew about the relationship with this man transitioning to trans woman. It wouldn't take much for you to think your son was getting brainwashed by the Sodom and Gomorrah of the cities, right? And left wing and all that kind of stuff. But as you say, there's one thing that really struck me in those texts when you talk about that sense of unreality, where he says, "I thought I was going to take this to my old age." Like, your dude, no, you weren't. You were going to get caught. Everybody gets caught. You were going to be in jail within a few days, and you're probably going to get sentenced to death. So that was another example of, like, oh, you thought you were just gonna kind of like run to ground and never get caught? Like, dude, I don't think so. So yeah, that sense of unreality, uh even in those texts, it was sort of like he was a hater and, welp, I just did it. Like, really? Like as you said, it was kind of, was he that much of a hater? I mean, he's a hater. There's no question. Most of us did not kill him. And some combination of unreality and also um people who kill people, they want to, the the real motivation is they want to kill someone. And that's, the example with the Trump assassin guy we talk about, like with school shootings. Again, the sort of understanding that I got of the chronology when everybody was kind of pouring over this was that he was actually seemed to be planning on a school shooting, and then he noticed Trump was coming to town because this happened in the kid's hometown, and then kind of thought, like, fuck, that's a school shooting on steroids, man. I'm gonna that it was that momentary, that sort of uh contingent, kind of based on nothing. Killing is something young guys do, and usually it's a school shooting, sometimes not.
Yeah, and we gotta move on, but I do want to reiterate at the end, and I know that not every one of these shootings is a perfect example of this, but the United States is not the only country with hyper partisanship and, you know, anger, if not hatred, at the other party and an unbelievably irresponsible president. We're just the only country where it's really easy to get a deadly weapon. So I know that we've all kind of collectively given up on ever trying to change the status quo there, but that's still the facts on the ground. Okay, so big tonal shift here, but on Tuesday, the day before we're recording, the GOP unveiled their continuing resolution. It is a quote unquote pretty clean CR. It goes for 7 weeks till the end of November. It does not address the Obamacare subsidies or any of the kind of general healthcare asks that Democrats have been making. It does include about $30 million for members of Congress to have beefed up security after the Charlie Kirk killing, along with some millions for Supreme Court security, as well as that of the executive branch. It seems that Republicans are going to use that combined with the Kirk killing as kind of a sweetener and a cudgel for Democrats who are planning to vote against it. And on that front, where we are now, which is Wednesday afternoon, again, the House just doesn't really matter. They can do it with all Republican votes. And so far, the kind of opposition, the holdouts seem already pretty shaky. It's Massey who probably will vote against it, but then it's like Victoria Spartz who every single time says she won't vote for it and then does. So it seems, and Johnson is projecting some confidence that he'll be able to get it through fairly easily. So then it all kind of comes back to the Senate like it did last time, where due to the filibuster, Republicans need some Democratic support. As of now, the Democratic leadership is saying no dice if we don't have permanent ACA subsidy extension, if we don't have language preventing the administration from unilaterally doing rescissions and undoing every single appropriations bill that Congress passes. And then they haven't been really explicit about this, but they've talked about reversing the cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, and the National Institutes of Health. So that's the general kind of ask right now. And so now it kind of, we'll have some House drama for a couple days. Are any of these Republican holdouts actually going to hold out? We'll probably pass there. And then it all comes down to Senate Democrats and whether they have the appetite to shut the government down rather than vote for a CR, which, gives them nothing, but which the Republican leadership is kind of billing as just, it gives us more time to figure out next steps.
Right. Uh, the proof will be in the details, but at least on its face, this is more than they were saying they were going to do. If I'm understanding this, this is permanent restoration of the ACA subsidies, language in the bill that prevents rescissions. Now, details count a lot there. And putting back the Medicaid, Medicare funding and NIH funding. Now, on its face, putting back the Medicaid funding, that's how they funded their entire budget. So to put it mildly, that is a pretty big ask. Now, when we talked about this last time, or one of our previous pods, we talked about that the one thing you don't want to do is having kind of a lo-fi agreement about one more year of Obamacare subsidies, because no one's ever going to know that happened. It's going to go through, and all you're really doing is in essence making a donation to the Republicans' 2026 midterm election campaign. What you're at least talking about here is pretty big asks, if these are all being asked for, that puts the entirety of the attack on healthcare on the table, that the administration will certainly not agree to short of a shutdown. And when you talk, I am always for leaning forward and asking big. It's basically impossible for them to undo their Medicaid cuts, because that's literally how they funded their entire budget. Now, you can do anything you want. They also kind of increase the deficit, so you don't have to pay for any of it. But that's for the purposes of this conversation, this is a lot, and it is, I think, categorically different, or it is not just a matter of extent with what we were hearing was going to be happening. Now, having said all that, Chuck Schumer has not released a sort of a for the older among us, contract for America, Gingrich's which in fact was utter nonsense. It didn't include anything. It just included a bunch of stupid things that no one cared about in practice. Votes on things, whatever, didn't matter if they passed. But this would be different in two ways. If you were actually restoring all of those things, that makes a massive difference across the country in people's lives. That's not 1 year of ACA subsidies, which is not nothing, but close to nothing. It also guarantees a big enough fight that it'll be a big fight. And what the fight is about will be talked about constantly. So on both of those fronts, it's much different. And then you have the rescission language, which goes to a key part of the old chestnut preserving democracy. Doesn't do anything about occupying blue cities, whatever. And again, I have to stress, this seems to be what they're going to ask for. Their initial position seems. But at least if it is something like that, it is at least really different from what it seemed like they were going to do. What's your take on that?
All right, a few things. One of which is, if we remember the last time Senate Democrats voted to fund the government in March, kind of caused the great demoralization of the Democratic base. One of the interesting things was Brian Schatz, who's widely expected to kind of be the next number 2 for Senate Democrats. He voted to fund the government, which was seen as both, a kind of a nod to his desire to be in leadership, and also giving something of a shield because he's kind of a progressive in good standing.
Yep.
So this time he tweeted, Trump has said explicitly he wants to go this alone, without Democrats. I wish him luck. I'm a no. So he is calculating differently this time, which I think is like kind of a good bellwether state, if you will. You have Jeffries and Schumer, as you say, coming out with like quite a package, right? Like this is kind of the we're going into the mat for healthcare thing that, Democrats have liked the idea of more than kind of getting into the shutdown fight for some of the other ideas, like the kind of slate of authoritarian actions. Like this is very kind of healthcare plus, our job as Congress.
Right.
But I think, and I've read a lot about this and a lot of people have written about it, and it's just nobody kind of knows what to say after the shutdown, right? I think it's kind of easy to have an opinion up until then. Like you can't go along. It's going to just completely demoralize the base. And also you just can't, as a kind of responsible public servant, you can't sign your name to what is being done, by the federal government. And I think that's right and good. And we've talked about this on a previous podcast, that even just, you got to, get your muscles ready to fight, because that's what we need in the future. You need some practice swings. But I think the biggest, most pressing question that everyone seems to kind of wriggle out of is, okay, let's say this passes through the House like we expect with just Republican votes. House Democrats, pretty easy for them. They can just say, no, this is unprincipled, and not really have to deal with any of the fallout. Senate Democrats, Fetterman's going to vote for the CR, but we don't have anybody else yet. And right now, Rand Paul is saying he's going to vote against it, which, who knows, that could change, but that leaves 7 Democrats that you need.
Okay, so that brings it, if Rand Paul actually votes against it, that brings it to 6. Obviously, who knows what he would do. So let's say let's say 6, depending on with the yeah, 6
Okay.
Democrats. I think they're going to. That's the kind of thing you're not going to have. That's going to be a group decision, right? It's not going to. I don't think there's anybody. I don't think there's anybody there who's like teetering, aside from Fetterman, who's teetering on the edge, who's going to get some little inducement, who's going to, who's going to switch sides. I mean, as it often as we saw back in March, you know, in on paper, some people decide to vote for it, but that's because there was a general agreement. Okay, we're going to do this, and these people who, for whatever reasons, think they're going to be the ones who take the plunge, they're going to take the plunge. Let's go back to Schatz for a second, because not only did he, I guess he gave a little cover to Schumer and those folks, but he also took a lot of hits.
Mm-hmm.
He took a lot of hits. People were very disappointed in him because he has, Schatz has, he's young as senators go. I think he's late 40s, something like that, maybe 50. And he's pretty progressive. And he's also very online. He spends a lot of time on social media and stuff like that. As Kate said, I think it's one of those things where if he's in the leadership now, he wants to ascend the leadership to be the number 2. And he wants to be the number 2 because he wants to be the number 1. And Chuck Schumer leaving might not be that far in the future. And I think the idea there was, if you want to lead the team, you've got to be part of the team on this one. And the team was the leadership. You can't, buck the leadership. So, yeah, we'll see how. But let's we're coming to the end here. But I want to zoom in a bit more on this, Kate. On that point about, okay, so Fetterman votes for it. You've got 54 votes, 6 votes. Let's set aside Ron Paul. Then what happens? What are you hearing? What do you think? How do we think this plays out?
Well, this is the thing. You make the play, you let it shut down, you say it's because we are safeguarding healthcare for the American people. We will not allow it to be ripped away. Great. That's going to get a lot of coverage for.
Yeah.
And at the beginning, the coverage is probably going to be what Democrats want it to be. I mean, make no bones about it. The mainstream press will cover this as Democrats shut down the government despite their place in the minority, but it'll be they shut down the government for healthcare stuff, right? Like there is kind of an easy way to get at least that into the news. But as you say, there is just no conceivable universe where Republicans will capitulate to this degree of asks, right? This isn't the ACA subsidies that some number of the Republican conference wants. This is like kind of undoing their like signature piece of legislation.
Yeah, get rid of your budget, basically. We want you to undo your whole budget. Yeah.
So you keep that in mind, right? We know they know that. And as the shutdown drags, as it becomes more difficult, as you have squishy Democrats say, I don't like this, I'm in a frontline district, I don't want to be blamed. What's the play there? Do you try to hold a shutdown for X amount of time and then you kind of plan to say like, well, we protested, we made our point, we got some headlines, now we're just going to kind of fall in line? I mean, I think that's the really, really tricky juncture that basically everyone who's written about this kind of bows out at that point and kind of hopes that somebody else has like a better plan for that moment. And that is the area where I think this isn't as easy a call as some people have portrayed it to be.
Yeah, no, and look, this is the argument of the go along people. Like, yeah, let's fight, but what is your plan to, what's your end game here? How do we get to a win, or how do we get to something? Where are we going here? And that is, I mean, and look, I am a hawk on this stuff, but yeah, that's a tough one, because they're not going to undo the entire Medicaid thing. And let's remember here, the Republican senators can decide to change the rules. They can get rid of the filibuster. So there is an out here, and I have a simple response to this. Great. To me, that's a win, because Democrats will be back in power one day, and nothing is possible with the filibuster in place. So if that happens, to me, that's one positive outcome. That's fine. I happen to think it's less likely than a lot of people think it is. Yes, Trump will be demanding it, but those Republican senators know as well as anyone that it's a much better tool for Republicans than it's ever been for Democrats. So I think they'll actually have a hard time doing that, but they might do that. And yeah, I think what it comes down to is this. You need to take the plunge. You need to talk about healthcare constantly. You need to say, not only do you need to bring back this Medicaid funding, but you could actually pay for it just by taking away some tax cuts for billionaires. You need to talk about that constantly for a good couple weeks, day after day. You need to have your allied groups publishing studies about, and these studies already exist. I could find these numbers in 2 minutes of Googling right now. How many people in each district, in each state, are going to lose health care? And you talk about that constantly. Who knows where that's going to go? It may end up that your leadership has to go before the mics after a couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and said, we made our point. We let everybody know this is what we want. We want people's health care to be restored. Donald Trump does not care. He is doing it because he'll do all sorts of X, Y, and Z things to up the pressure. And we have no more hold cards. So we are going to let this go through. I'm not saying I want that to happen at that point, but maybe you get to that point. And will that be a disaster? It'll be bad compared to getting more of and maybe there is a compromise. I'm just saying the worst case scenario. I think that is much better than just letting this go through. I just do. I think that's vastly better, even if you get nothing.
I agree. I just think when you're making this calculation, like, there's just almost nowhere for Democrats to fall at this point. So might as well kind of try fighting and see what happens. And I'm also pretty skeptical of these people who say, like, well, it could, poison Democrats' midterm hopes. Look,
No.
they're
Yeah.
overperforming in special elections, which may not have any predictive quality for a presidential election, but tends to with the smaller electorate of a midterm.
Yep.
Also, our memories are just gnat-like at this point. I think that's an excuse for doing nothing. I think you got to try to fight. And like, we're gaming this out to the best of our ability, but we have no idea what's going to happen.
Absolutely.
Maybe Republicans do want to sustain the filibuster, and so they're willing to give something. Maybe even the ACA subsidies in exchange for Democrats' votes. And you know what? That's negotiation. That's gamesmanship. That will let Democrats say, hey, we shut everything down to protect your ACA subsidies. That's a far cry from doing one of these kind of closed door, quiet deals that nobody will ever hear from. So
yeah,
I agree. And we're running a little long, but I really want to do a brief section on this before we end, which, if that is some amount of a difficult political call, this next topic for Schumer and Jeffries is a slam dunk, easy political call. And I think they're doing some of like the worst politics I've ever seen. And so I just want to get this out here, which is this week, both Jeffries and Schumer have made comments to reporters about how, differing versions of they have talked to Zohran Mamdani. The talks are ongoing. They're still thinking about it. They'll probably have an answer on an endorsement kind of in the near future. And I think this is so unbelievably brain dead that it's, like, hard for me to kind of get my arms around, because there were 2 options for you if you're Schumer or Jeffries. You know, no matter how scared you are of this super popular, organic, exciting candidate that's kind of come out of nowhere to be in your midst, your options were you endorse him right away, or you do not endorse him right away and you say why you're not endorsing him. And in that version of events, I guess you're so worried that Fox News is kind of going to make Mamdani the face of the party, which they will do anyway, that you're trying to like keep some distance from him. What was not an option for you is to inexplicably drag out this decision for months, creating this iterative, ongoing dem on dem violence story where this like young, super popular upstart, like one of the first candidates to get grassroots libs excited in quite some time, is opposed by the leadership of the Democratic Party, who, by the way, has no other option, even if they don't like him, even if they wish they didn't get a kind of talented, charismatic Democrat out of nowhere. What are you going to do? Endorse Cuomo, Trump's chosen candidate? You know, the beret guy? Like, there's no, they are going to endorse Mamdani at some point. And I think dragging it out like this and waiting to do it until the last minute is so bizarre and like turns every possible win here into a loss. I just don't understand why Schumer and Jeffries couldn't have done something like, it's exciting and inspirational to kind of like see a candidate that's gotten people so excited, you know, and I'm on board. You don't even have to get into his policy stuff. Like Hochul's endorsement, I thought was like unbelievably lame. Every single sentence is like, "No, we don't agree on everything, but at least she did it." I think this is so bizarre and is not going to get them anything if they're thinking this gives them some amount of like distance from him. So when Fox News starts doing like terrible kind of Islamophobic stuff about him, they can be like, well, I took 2 months to endorse. So, this isn't my circus or monkeys.
Yeah, I have a slightly different take on this, and one, but I agree with you on the big picture, which is that they've handled this in a comically inept way, and they will get nothing for their faux distance. One thing that is important to keep in mind, I haven't seen every poll, but I've seen a lot of polls. And what actually is a little worrisome to me, first of all, Mamdani is not over 50%. He's just under it in the most recent polls I've seen. He's like 48 or something like that. The worrisome part to me, well, okay, so the most recent poll I saw, he's at 48, and everybody else is light years behind him. Everybody being Cuomo, the ridiculous incumbent mayor Eric Adams, and Curtis Sliwa, who's like a, I don't know, like a waiting for Guffman type candidate at this point. What's worrisome though is that in that same poll, when they made it Cuomo versus Mamdani, it drew to like a 4-point race. And Mamdani did not go up. He stayed. I may be getting the numbers like one off here, but basically he stayed at like 48 or 49, and Cuomo was like 45 or something. It was the delta between them was 4 points. Now, I don't think they're going to get that race. I don't think they could buy Adams out of the race. I don't think Slee was going to get out of the race, but that's a vulnerable position, because you can't rule out the possibility that it may become a two-person race. That's one thing. That also should put some brakes on our idea of his popularity. He's extremely popular among a lot of Democrats, and New York is a very democratic city, but he's not clearly over 50%. So that's one point there. I understand why they are cautious, basically because New York is, relative to the rest of the country, a very left wing city. Its electorate is different. You can't his particular even his, I was going to say, you can't just take his particular policies into other parts of the country and think they will be equally popular. But in fact, you can't even literally take his policies out of New York City. Most of them are actually could only operate in New York City. You're talking about policies that have to do with a city that has rent control and a robust bus system and all this kind of stuff. But that's all too bad because he is the candidate of the Democratic Party. And they are being too clever by half to think that, as you say, Kate, Fox is going to go, wow, we were going to kind of plaster this dude's face everywhere and make him the face of the Democratic Party, but Schumer never endorsed, so we are out of luck. I mean, come the fuck on, right? So there's nowhere for them to go here. And the last point is, to me, now I have thought, I'm still a New York State voter. I have seen Kathy Hochul, our accidental but subsequently actually elected governor, as just purely useless, a useless governor. But she has got the anti-Trump religion in the last month or so. She is hardcore. And to me, it is an example of not just that she's gotten the religion, but the governors get this religion because governors have some power, whereas the legislatures, the Jeffries and the Schumers, do not. So it's not accidental that Newsom and Pritzker and even Hochul, the uselessness of the most useless of the useless, has gotten religion here. And yes, she's saying I disagree here, but she's totally behind him. And so that, to me, that's kind of our politics there, that it's the governors because they have executive power. But a big point, they're not gaining anything here. They look stupid. Because, as you said, they don't even have a reason. They haven't even said, like, if they said, maybe they would say, hey, he's too pro-Palestine. He's going to arrest Netanyahu. He's going to do whatever. At least that would be a reason, right? They would say, okay, well, he does. And you kind of whatever. But they're not willing to say that because Israel and Netanyahu are super unpopular among Democrats right now.
Yeah, I think your points are good and well taken and would be serious considerations if Jeffries and Schumer were considering whether to back a Mamdani for president run, right? But that's not what's happening.
Yeah, I wouldn't back Mamdami for president. Yeah, no, it's totally, it's meaningless.
This would not have been a story if Mamdani wins the nomination and the next day or that night, Schumer and Jeffries put out some kind of statement that's like, congratulations, to our primary winner. You've engendered great enthusiasm around the base and, eager to support you in your general election run. Like you don't have to like bear hug every piece about him.
And then you can ghost him nonstop every day until the election.
And that is a non-story. That wouldn't even get written up. What Democratic official endorses Democratic candidate? Like, oh, thrilling. Now they've made it into a huge thing. And when Fox News does start the wall-to-wall coverage about how Mamdani has created some kind of like den of iniquity in New York, they're going to have as a talking point, even his own party didn't want to endorse him. That's how dangerous this guy is, right? I just think it's so unbelievably stupid.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's the first point is the key one. It would have seemed obvious on the first night, and you can endorse and then just be kind of criticizing him constantly for months after that, and it's a non-issue. But now they have made it in, like, endorsing him is almost like, I don't know, joining the PLO or something. PLO is not what it used to be, but like it's some like massive thing. And the reality is they're just boxed in, and I'm not actually as confident as you are that they will eventually endorse him. I'm not saying they won't. I'm just, but it's meaningless. They are making themselves look silly. and they are sending a unhelpful signal to the leftward flank of the Democratic Party that we might just, kind of someone who's, pretty normal dude, all things considered, that we're not going to endorse because that's a toxic thing to get out there for all the reasons that we know.
All right. Covered a wide swath today.
We did a very wide swath, from Charlie Kirk to Mamdani, which is a very wide swath.
Which I'm sure is a connection Fox News will attempt to make in the coming days somehow.
Yes, somehow. Tyler Robinson, the jihadi. Yes. Okay. I guess that is all we got for this week. Yeah?
Yep. See you next week.
See you later.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe wherever you listen.